Hello and welcome to a very special Reuters read along. That's right, you heard it right. You heard it correctly. We're going to be focusing on Reuters this week. Our guest is Ernest Scheyder. He's the senior correspondent for Reuters and the author of a new book, uh, The War Below: Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the guest host. I'm sitting in for Sree this morning. Sree is not feeling well, but I am stepping in as the guest host. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Please like, please comment, please share, please retweet, tag people you know. This is going to be an interesting discussion. We're going to focus on Reuters for the first time, so we're excited about that. The famous news service, as I'm sure you know, and we'll talk about how wire services have evolved over the years. But we'll also be talking about Ernest's new book, The War Below, and just as a to frame that, you know, really the key issue is a question of this quote right here from the promo. To build electric vehicles, solar panels, cell phones, and millions of other devices means the world must dig more mines to extract lithium, copper, and other vital building blocks. But mines are deeply unpopular, even as they have a role to play in fighting climate change and powering crucial technologies. So we'll be discussing that balance, that tension between trying to be more environmentally friendly and addressing climate change, but do we want to dig more mines? Do we want to potentially impact biodiversity in various parts of the planet? So we certainly want to. We'll dig into that with Ernest. Please let us know where you're watching from. You can type your comments right into Facebook, into YouTube, into LinkedIn. We are also live on Instagram. You can type comments there, and I'll every now and then I'll take a look at my screen to the side to see who's watching, and we will put your comments on the air. As a reminder, we do need you to press play on the video if you're watching on Facebook or on LinkedIn. If it's coming through your feed, press play on the video so that we can see your comments. And as far as Twitter is concerned, we can see comments if you press play on desktop, if you're watching there, but not on mobile, unfortunately. So a few technical notes, but we hope you will figure that out as you go. A few folks that have already logged in. Our friend Jonathan offers greetings from the East Village, where he's plotting to unleash a website. Jonathan, congratulations. I didn't know you were going to share it on the show. Flamencoinnewyork.com. Encourage everyone to check it out. And Jonathan, congratulations on this new endeavor. Looking forward to hearing more about it as it evolves. Stefan is watching. He says, "Good morning to the New York Times Read Along family. We're taking on the Reuters Read Along banner today." But and he says he hopes Sree feels better. This is going to be fascinating, he says, the discussion about Reuters and about the book. And of course, it's Super Bowl Sunday. Solid matchup. Hopefully, folks will enjoy it. And I certainly wouldn't bet against Patrick Mahomes. Thank you, Stefan. And I will say that as a Swifty dad, I'm rearranging my schedule to make sure my daughter wants to watch the Super Bowl tonight and wants to watch the coverage of Taylor and uh, Kelsey. And I'm all for it. And we talked about this last week a little bit on the show. It's a good thing for everyone, for football, for culture. There's so many times that Hollywood stars show up at NBA games, etc. Camera focuses on them. No one complains. No one should complain about Taylor as well. Here's a first comment from Twitter. Diane is watching, saying good morning from Margate, New Jersey, and she's excited for the Reuters read along. So why don't we go ahead and get the show going? I want to remind folks that our guest is on Twitter. You can follow him, Ernest Scheyder, and I'm going to make sure I'm pronouncing that right. Apologized, Ernest. I'm getting a thumbs up backstage. So Ernest Scheyder. He's the author of The War Below, Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. Ernest, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, Neil.
Thank you so much. And as I mentioned earlier, Sree sends his regrets that he couldn't make it last minute. So I am stepping in as our guest host. But I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome, me as well.
So why don't we jump right in? And want to ask you, before we talk about the book specifically, tell us a little bit more about your background. I know you know Sree for has known him for several years, going back to school, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so tell us a little bit more about your career and your time at Reuters.
Sure. So I've been at Reuters for about 15 years and born and raised in Maine and went to the University of Maine and moved to New York to go to school at Columbia, where I met Sree and was one of his students there. And after Columbia, I was at the AP for 2 years and then jumped into Reuters, where I took a huge focus on a lot of the raw materials that help form the building blocks of our world. Chemical companies, oil companies, natural gas companies, and the shale boom was taking off around 2008, 2009, 2010, the US shale boom, powered by fracking technologies and other advancements, and I had a real opportunity to dive into that space at Reuters for the first few years of that boom. And then in 2014, Reuters came to me and sent me to North Dakota, which is a very prolific oil producing region here in the United States. It's got the Bakken Shale formation there, filled with many, many, many millions of barrels of oil, and got a chance to really report on the ground for just about 2 years on the people and the companies that were reshaping U.S. oil production. After that, I came to Houston and I was reporting on ExxonMobil and Chevron and OPEC, really getting into the global battle around oil there. And then in about 2018, I decided to take a big shift and really focus on the then small nascent area of critical minerals. And the more I reported on those spaces the past 5 or 6 years, the more I really started to see a narrative thread emerge around the tensions about where and how and why our country and our world hope to get the building blocks for green energy devices, as well as electronics that are increasingly underpinning our everyday lives. And so the book really is an off branch of my work at Reuters and really ties together a lot of the narrative threads there.
And it sounds like it's a long time that you've been working on around this subject, around this issue. It's not
Yes.
something that you just kind of fell upon more recently.
No,
Um,
no, I definitely started, as I said, this really builds on my work at Reuters. I did some independent reporting for the book, but it definitely builds on the past 5 or 6 years of this. And one of the things, Neil, that really stood out to me is the contrast with my oil and gas time. I mean, for many reasons that we could spend all day talking about, oil and gas tends to elicit very strong feelings on one side or the other from people. But the more at Reuters I reported on the critical mineral space, on plans to produce more lithium or copper or nickel or cobalt or other critical minerals in the US or the world, most people I talked to, I would say probably 98% said, yes, we need these. We need these critical materials in order to have the building blocks for these devices that can fight climate change or that power our lives. But the tension became around the idea of, well, not here, not this place, not in my backyard.
sure.
And so when you sort of added each of those instances up, for me, I really saw a very clear narrative here that formed the story for The War Below. And what I'm bringing to readers here with the book is the idea of choice. This is the main theme of the book. If we want this green energy transition, if we want all of these devices that underpin our everyday lives, like the cameras you and I are using right now, Neil, or the wiring that's transmitting our pictures back and forth,
A
or
cell
our cell
phone.
phones,
Yeah.
not to mention wind turbines or solar panels or electric vehicles, then we have to be having a discussion about whether some places are too special to mine, what are the choices we're willing to make, and also talk about who are the people who are affected. This is a book about people and how these choices affect those people in these frontline communities and in other places across the world. Because ultimately, this is a topic that affects everyone. So it's a book that I've written for everyone.
Sure. I want to bring in a few more folks who are watching. This next person is very special to me. My mom.
Hey.
Hi, mom. My mom is one of our most loyal viewers. She's in Tampa for the winter. But mom, thank you very much for watching. Always appreciate it.
Good morning from
Uh,
Tampa.
Melissa is watching from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Melissa is, we've gotten to know her over the last few years. We had her on the show when we did a tribute to Robin Herman, a former sports reporter for the New York Times. And Melissa has a new book coming out in the fall, and we're looking forward to having her on the show. She was a path-breaking female journalist. It's about her story about getting into men's locker rooms. Um, I believe back in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. Melissa, please drop the link, drop the title of the book, and that little bit of the background. Really would appreciate it. Put it in the comments. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar is joining us. She says, "Hello, all. I love the inside look at the sausage making of the news. Health, happiness, and success to all in this Lunar New Year." And I'm actually, it's a day off, but I'm wearing my red for Lunar New Year, which was yesterday. And I had a opportunity to go to my daughter's school and help out with their Lunar New Year celebration, which is always great when you can do that. We have Doug Levy joining us from San Francisco. And uh, Ernest, I'm saying you can't hear me. I'm going to check with other folks who are watching. If you can hear me, please let me know in the comments if you're having trouble with the audio. Um, we'll just do a quick check on that. And Ernest, let me check your audio. I could hear you earlier. Ernest, you can't hear me, so he's not able to hear me. We will keep going, and I'm hoping uh, all is well in the land. Our audience can hear, so that's good. So we'll have Ernest refresh his browser and come back in, and that should make a difference. Again, we are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and our Digimentors website. Thank you very much for confirming, Jonathan and Doug, that you can hear me. We have another comment from Twitter. Kaveri Madhavan is joining. Good afternoon from a sunny West Cork in Ireland. Our international audience checking in. Thank you, Kaveri. Always great to have folks join. I want to give a quick shout out to folks as I look to the side here. Sorry. Colleen Schuster is watching on Instagram, as is Carla Baranakis, a former producer for the show. She did a great job booking guests. She put us in touch with Melissa earlier. And my friend Cynthia is watching from on Instagram. Thank you so much. Hopefully you'll stay with us for the show. And again, as a reminder, uh, the book is The War Below. It's to build the basic premise to build electric vehicle solar panels. You have to do more mining. So I'm going to ask this question of the audience while I have you, and while we're waiting for Ernest to come back. What is your take on that? So in this issue, in this tension between climate change and the environment, really it's climate change, environment, biodiversity. We'll share some examples later, and Ernest will talk about. There's a particular area where they want to do some mining, but there is a flower where that's the only place that grows is in this area, but that's like the best place to get lithium that we need for our phones and electric vehicles, etc. Um, do we need to do harm to the environment with mining in order to save it long term? Um, what are your thoughts on that? How do we get through that tension? Um, and we're trying to figure that out. Jonathan, hopefully it's just for Jonathan. It says picture just froze and no sound. So again, checking in on the tech. Hopefully, we're coming through loud and clear for most folks. Covery said that it was loud and clear earlier, just about that same moment. So we will keep on keeping on. Um, the Again, and what we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking about Reuters as a wire service. So I don't know how familiar folks are with the way that wire services have evolved over the years. It used to be just Reuters and AP, maybe UPI back in its heyday. But then over the years, you had Agence France Presse, AFP, come on. You had Bloomberg start a wire service, and then others. Really other. There's some niche wire services as well. I liken it to TV in the 70s when you only had three main channels. And that's really what, were your options. Now you have a number of different options out there. And even, newspapers like the New York Times and Washington Post with their constant alerts, with their, push notifications have effectively become a wire service. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we'll take a little bit of a side step here with while we're still waiting, or hopefully Ernest will be able to come back on. Not sure what's going on with his uh, with tech on his side. But what we will do is take a quick sidelight since it is Super Bowl Sunday. Um, Want to call out the New York Times for doing an incredible job with a special section around uh, around the Super Bowl, and so we'll bring that up in just a moment. Um, let's bring that right up on screen. So we'll take a look and see what they've done for the Super Bowl, and I'll go off screen for just a moment. Um, so this is their special Super Bowl coverage. They put out a special 16-page section, as you can see, um, which they've only in the past done like 2 and 4 pages at a time. So it's really interesting, kind of how they've approached it this time. I want to make sure you get some good light on that. So this is their front page. A night of excess feels right at home. There's plenty to cheer and loathe in Las Vegas. And you see that front page, and the articles that are referred on the bottom is Taylor Swift increasing NFL viewership. It's complicated. I mentioned Taylor Swift at the top of the show. Um, and the Patrick Mahomes may be too much for the 49ers to overcome. A look back at San Francisco's and Kansas City's Super Bowl trips. Now, we don't usually focus on sports on the read along, whether we're talking about the New York Times or, um, Reuters in this case. But because it's the Super Bowl, it's certainly warranted. Um, we have 16 pages of coverage, and it really speaks to the global phenomenon of the Super Bowl. There's obviously the sports analysis going on, but again, I'm going to focus on this. Millions are tuning in to watch Swift and Kelsey, or is it Mahomes and Kelsey? That's a question that folks sifting ratings data for a flicker of a pop giant's star power. And as I mentioned earlier, my daughter is interested in watching because Taylor will be there, and she landed in Los Angeles last evening, so she should be there. But more of the coverage, just to give you a sense of how in depth they went. They dug into the archives for some previous Super Bowls, and then a huge article about Las Vegas, a city made for spectacle, shows some skepticism. And then Seeking Loathing of Gonzo author in modern Vegas about Hunter S. Thompson. So just to give you an idea of what the Times did, this is again a 16-page special section. They've only done 2 and 4 page sections in the past, so it's a special standalone print section that they put together, and they have a few other pages, sports pages at the end. But I wanted to kind of bring that up for you. And we have a few other comments that have come in, so we will take a look at that real quick. Um, uh, Stefan says that he was the supervising photo editor for the New York Times Wire for almost 2 decades and saw so much change over the years in how they function and get the news to media subscribers. Absolutely. And that's a great segue back in to Ernest. Let's see if Ernest can hear me this time. Ernest, can you hear me? And you're muted, Ernest. So you have to unmute your mic so we can hear you again. There we go.
There we go. I can hear you.
That's
Apologies
great.
for that.
No problem. Glad to have you back. We
You'd
took a
think
quick
4 years in, we'd all get the technology, but one day we'll all figure it out.
no worries. No worries. So what we were talking, what I did in between, did a little quick review of the New York Times Super Bowl section because
Oh,
they
awesome.
did 16 pages this Sunday, which they've never done before. It was a big deal. So we kind of showed people a glimpse of that. And I asked people while you're gone about that tension between, you know, technology and the climate change, the environment. How do you make that? How do we make those decisions? Do we potentially harm the environment with mining in order to save the environment with electric vehicles, windmills, etc.? Covery, who's watching in Ireland, said in India, valuable mining areas are tribal lands where mining companies have politicians at the helm. So you can imagine her follow up. So you can imagine whose interests are upheld, which definitely tracks with
Yeah.
some of what we've seen in other parts of the world as well. So I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Yeah, that's a part of the key theme here of the war below is really bringing to this audience. Okay, what are the areas that we're willing to mine and extract more? I mean, there's no getting around the fact that mines are loud, they're intrusive, they're literally holes in the ground, but they also produce the building blocks that are needed for our everyday lives. And so part of the tension around the book that I really want to bring to the reader is we need to be deciding in the United States and then elsewhere in the world, where are we willing to have these mines and what are the standards by which we allow for safe mining? One of the chapters in the book, I look at the history of how Tiffany and Company, the iconic jeweler, helped form this mining standardization schema known as IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. And this was Tiffany's reaction to the reality that it needs metals. It needs gold and silver and platinum and other metals for engagement rings and watches, etc. And this was founded by a gentleman, the CEO at the time, named Mr. Michael Kowalski, who is a very strong conservationist, but recognized that mines needed to happen somewhere. So working with other NGOs, Tiffany and Mr. Kowalski helped form IRMA, and it basically aimed to get together in the same room conservationists with labor unions, with indigenous groups, with mining companies customers, with investors and other groups, and put them in the same room and say, okay, what are the standards by which we are willing to accept safe mining? And Neil, if it sounds to you like putting all those people in the same room that there would be a brawl, like that's how it sounded to me when I first heard about this. It doesn't sound grounded in reality. And yet they actually have formed this organization and they have formed these standards. It took more than a decade, but they had to wrestle over things like water, like where are some parts of the world where it's okay to dump water or not. And that could have huge the effects depending on whether you're next to, say, the ocean or next to a body of fresh water. Mines do tend to discharge a lot of salty water. So if you're discharging it into the ocean, that's one thing. But if you're discharging it into a fresh body of water, obviously that'll have a huge deleterious effect. Another thing was heavily debated was on the best standards for informing local communities around what could happen in the event of an emergency and sort of being transparent there on issues related to that. And so these were all those and many, many more issues were hotly debated by all these people. And so now what you have is a set of IRMA standards by which a mine for any metal across the world can apply to be certified. And so a third party will come in and sort of rank the mine based on all of these factors. And then the results are publicly posted. So everyone in the world, me,
Wow.
you, Neil, everyone watching can go on to the IRMA website and figure out exactly how that mine is performing against these standards. So it's designed to bring transparency. And most importantly, for our global supply chain, the companies that buy these metals know that these standards are out there and that are being transparent. So Ford, have said they're going to sign on to IRMA standards. Microsoft, BMW, and many other manufacturers are increasingly demanding this. And so this chapter of the book dives into the history of IRMA and why it's so important for the everyday modern supply chain for a lot of these building blocks. And that's all due to Tiffany, of all places.
And it's interesting that they fought the Alaska's Pebble Mine
Yes.
for
Yep.
some of those reasons. Let's go ahead and share that we have a number of other pictures that
Yep.
you've shared with us to help tell the story
Yeah.
behind the book. So again, the book is The War Below: Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives, and that's really what it comes down to. These are the minerals we need for everyday devices and electric vehicles and windmills and other technologies that we're hoping will, head off climate change. So we're going to have change. It's just a question of what kind of change we
Right.
want, right?
Right. And what are we willing as consumers to want? And so the main narrative arc that I use in the book, well, I do go to several proposed mine sites across the United States and the world. I did focus on the US on purpose because I do feel like this is a topic that US audiences need to grapple with, especially. And the main story revolves around the site that you see here in the picture, which is Rhyolite Ridge, about 200 miles north of Las Vegas in Nevada. It's on the Nevada-California border. And there you have a massive deposit of lithium, as well as boron. And this site is extremely prolific. It could produce hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of electric vehicle batteries, depending on the size, if it is extracted. But unfortunately for the company that wants to produce it, also at that site was discovered a rare flower found nowhere else on the planet. And I took this photo in 2022, late in the summer. So the flower, which is sort of in the foreground, is dormant there. But it's this beautiful grayish bluish flower with grayish bluish stems, and sort of like a light yellow flower that blooms between May and June. And this flower is found nowhere else on the planet. So therein lies the huge tension. It's sort of what matters more became the initial question. Like, could the flower survive if the mine actually happened, or would the flower have to go away? And sort of more importantly, like, would the flower go extinct if nothing was done about climate change, if efforts to mitigate climate change through the use of electric vehicles and other electronic devices powered by this lithium, would the flower just go away? And so therein lies sort of the tension and the rub that I explore in depth. And the book looks at the company that wants to produce it, including its executive chairman, who is a former oil executive and really sees lithium as his way to leave the planet better than the one that he found. He wants to basically leave a greener planet to his grandchildren and children than the one that he found. So for him, it's become an almost moral focus for him. On the other side, you've got a conservation group that I chronicle in the book that is very strongly opposed for biodiversity reasons to this mine, to this project, out of concern that it could be a bit of a slippery slope. That is, if we let this flower go extinct, sort of what's next? Is it more flowers? Is it wildlife? Is it XYZ? And so therein lies the tension that I explore in the book. And the company goes to some pretty strong lengths to try to show U.S. federal regulators that it can indeed save this plant. And I sort of explore those efforts, including building greenhouses and other things, which is not typically mining industry practice. So this is Rhyolite Ridge. This is the main focus of the book.
So tell us about John Kerry's role in all of this.
Yeah, so this is John Kerry signing the Paris Climate Accords, and the young lady with him is his granddaughter. And for him, the Paris Climate Accords is a huge way to help leave the planet better for his granddaughter and for his other family members than the one that he found. And so the book sort of posits at the beginning that, of course, if we want to do anything about climate change, we've got to be thinking about the actual steps to get there. And so the Paris Climate Accord sets these targets for reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, among other targets. And to get there, though, you need these devices powered by these critical metals. And so what then Secretary Kerry signed all those years ago requires the use of these critical minerals and metals. And so for me, it was important to include him in the narrative here and sort of his push. President Obama called the Paris Climate Accords one of the biggest achievements of his 2 terms in office. And it's been a huge focus, of course, for the global economy ever since.
And President Biden went on to name John Kerry to a
Yes.
cabinet level post
Yep.
focusing on climate. And although he recently stepped down or announced that he was going to step down, I'm not sure on the timing to help with the campaign. I thought it was actually telling that Biden announced that John Podesta would be stepping
Mm.
into that role, who certainly doesn't maybe have the same, certainly wasn't an elected official, wasn't a presidential nominee, but John Podesta certainly has the inside the Beltway connections and reputation. He put someone serious into that role. He's not kidding
Yes.
around with
Yeah, and
climate
John
change.
Podesta, is just as an aside, Neil, to your point, has been implementing the Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law, climate fund handouts. So
Mm,
companies that get grants as part of this, Mr. Podesta has been overseeing that. So intimately involved in climate related work, in addition to his other work at the White House. So sort of an ideal person, perhaps, for the administration to include in this work as Secretary Kerry transitions.
absolutely. You also include this picture of James Calloway, the chairman
Yes.
of Ioneer Limited.
Yes. So Ioneer, Mr. Calloway here is the gentleman that would like to develop this lithium mine. He's a former oil field executive and really sees developing this mine as sort of key to his goal of leaving the planet better off than the one that he found. And so he has been working on this project since at least 2015, 2016. So we're going on roughly, 7, 8 years now. And it's been his singular focus. And there are very few people in the world that can actually say they've built even one lithium project, let alone two. And Mr. Calloway is sort of one of those people. He had previously built a lithium project in Argentina, and got that up and running. That's now owned by a company called Arcadium, and that's in the northern portions of Argentina, and part of what's called the Lithium Triangle in South America, where Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina overlap. And we'll talk about Bolivia a little bit later in the conversation. But this is, this man's singular focus here.
Sure. And then kind of filling out your cast of characters. This is Dr. Wenchler Nosy, if I'm
Nosy, yes, yeah.
pronouncing that correctly.
Yes, yep, yes. So Dr. Nosy helped leads in Arizona what's known as Apache Stronghold. It's an organization comprised of some members of the San Carlos Apache indigenous tribe, as well as other conservationists and environmentalists and others that are opposed to plans by Rio Tinto and BHP, two mining companies, to develop the Resolution Copper Project at about an hour east of Phoenix in a town known as Superior, near a town known as Superior, excuse me. And for religious and indigenous rights reasons, Apache Stronghold has been very strongly opposed to this. The mine would be an underground mine if developed. And over time, about 20, 30, 40 years, it would slowly cause a crater known in industry parlance as a glory hole. That is the actual term. And it would basically swallow the site where Dr. Nosy here is standing. And for the San Carlos Apache, that would be a huge problem because the site is where they go to worship their deities, as well as practice special rituals for teenage girls and for others that have come of age. And so it's a very special, ethereal, religiously important site that many of them, including Dr. Nosy, shared with me would be sort of like destroying the St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Like, obviously, Roman Catholics would strongly oppose that. And so they would say, well, what if you found copper underneath St. Peter's Basilica? Would you just blow it up so you could get the copper? And so this is sort of the fight that Dr. Nosy and others have brought to it.
Sure. And it's not my religious site, so
Correct.
what's
Right.
the
Yeah.
big deal?
And I was at pains here not to interject my belief or even and sort of take a value judgment on some people who did tell me for the book, oh, it's not a religious site. It hasn't been up until this mine started getting developed. That's really not for me to decide. And I was very much at pains when I was writing the book to just sort of present what different sides are saying about this. And there are multiple sides. There's not just one or two sides here, but I was really at pains to say, okay, here are the issues. Here is a group of people that clearly believe this is a religious site. And there are some people that say that it is not. But it's not my job to say whether it is or isn't. It's my job to really bring to the reader this idea of choice. Like, what do we matter more? Are we really going to, have this site be affected by this copper mine?
And just for folks who might be joining us late, our guest is Ernest Scheyder. He's a senior correspondent at Reuters, and his new book is The War Below: Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. And the basic tension that we're talking about is, for us to get the materials we need for electric vehicles, solar panels, cell phones that are ubiquitous in our lives now. We need to dig more mines and extract these heavy metals. And the question is, not just a question of mining in general, but then a question of where these mines are. And we talked about how there's a particular spot where there's a flower that only grows in that one area. Are we willing to sacrifice biodiversity to get these minerals? The example he was just talking about is that one mine is in an area of religious significance to Native Americans, indigenous peoples here in the U.S. Um, are we willing to sacrifice? Are we willing to make that kind of call? Ernest was sharing the analogy. What if they discovered lithium underneath St. Peter's Basilica? Would we dig it up if we're running out of lithium at some point, right? If that's the last place where we can get it, are people going to make that decision?
Yeah.
So these are some really thorny questions. I want to bring in a few folks who have joined us. Our good friend Paula Kiger is joining from Tallahassee, Florida. Paula is a longtime producer of the show. Thank you, Paula, as always. Linda Lawrence is joining a little bit late from Long Island, but Linda, thank you as always, as is our friend Rahadian from Bayshore, New York. I will take this moment to do a few housekeeping announcements. As a reminder, this show is produced by Digimentors, the consulting firm that Sree and his friend Andrew Lee set up several years ago. We do digital marketing, events and digital programs, strategic communications. We do a series of workshops. We also do staffing and recruiting. We also help amplify events on social media for various clients. The big thing Sree is working on now is AI, his non-scary practical guide to generative AI. So if you're interested in that, please reach out and we will help you set up a workshop for your organization or your nonprofit. You can learn more about Sree's AI work on our website. It's digimentors.group Sree AI. Digimentors.group/Sree AI. If you go there, you'll see some articles he's written. You'll see kind of an outline of what we'll talk about and a way to submit a request. So we certainly encourage you to do that. I also want to share with folks, and we talked about this in the last show on Sunday, but last week I launched a new live stream called "Shining Light on Shadows: A Candid Conversation About Mental Health." Last week was our first episode. My co-host was Dawn Helmrich, and as folks saw on the show, I shared that I suffer from anxiety and depression, Ernest. And it's something that I've dealt with for a number of years. And it kind of was motivated after a series of shows I did last year to have a larger conversation about it. So we're going to be bringing on different guests to share their experiences. We'll be bringing on practitioners and others. And hopefully the goal is to reduce the stigma around mental health challenges that folks face. One of the comments that Kavri shared earlier, and I thought it's not exactly related to this conversation, but I thought might be interesting to discuss. She said jewelry ads should carry explicit pics and warnings like cigarette ads. This is the result of lawsuits to show the exploitation of child minors. Now, if we kind of take a look at that, but apply it in this case, for example, if I'm buying a cell phone and on the side of the box it says, your buying this cell phone led to the destruction of, this environmental area, this habitat, or we had to destroy a religious an area of religious significance so that you could use your device. That's kind of taking it to an extreme, but that kind of ad campaign probably wouldn't get warning labels, but that ad campaign might make people think twice, might not. I don't know. And we need to. There we go. Got your volume. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Kaveri, for sharing that. One of the chapters I look at in the book involves leaf blowers, which sort of sounds innocuous and silly, but for me, it was a way into the sourcing question. About a few years ago, I got a house, and I decided, as part of my suburban dream, to be very macho and take care of the lawn myself. And so I got an electric lawnmower and an electric weed whacker. I was writing the book at the time, so I felt going all electric was the way to go. I even bought an electric, leaf blower. And so that brought me down
too.
this.
I have all of those.
Yeah, they're amazing, right? Very, very efficient. And the beauty is you can swap the battery out for each one. You don't have to worry with mixing oil and gasoline. You don't have to worry about switching out the carburetor and doing all that other stuff that frankly confuses me. I just have to swap out the battery and boom, you're off to the races. But since I was writing this book, it brought me down the rabbit hole of, okay, well, where did the cobalt in that battery come from?
Mm-hmm.
Did it come from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where unfortunately, sometimes we can have children as young as 6 or 7 be part of the mining supply chain. This is what's known as artisanal mining sometimes, where families or children will either break onto sites or even be part of mining sites and go in there with pickaxe and shovel and literally take rock out of the ground and then sell it to a middleman that will then sell it into the refining and distribution scheme. And it can be extremely difficult to figure out if the cobalt produced that way ends up in average consumer devices, despite the best efforts of companies like Tesla. As much as Elon Musk is in the news for things all over the map, he is very strongly opposed to cobalt from the DRC being part of this artisanal mining supply chain. He's been very vocal about that. But it can be extremely difficult to find out if the cobalt in my leaf blower came from that route. I have a lot of resources at my disposal, and I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out if the copper came from Peru, where there's been huge protests by farmers because mining trucks from copper mines will kick up a lot of dirt that will pollute and basically kill crops. I couldn't figure out if the lithium came from northern Chile, one of the biggest lithium producing regions in the world, but then was shipped across the Pacific Ocean to be processed into a cathode, which is part of a battery, and then put into a battery pack that was then put into this battery that went into my leaf blower before it came back across the Pacific Ocean. I mean, just think about that huge, long, circuitous route. I couldn't figure out any of this information, and I tried. And so I think you start to see the opacity of that supply chain, and it brings up a lot of interesting questions, to your point, Kaveri, about where are these things coming from. So in this scenario, I don't even think you could put such a warning label because it's just unclear about where a lot of these metals came from. And so what I argue in the book is we have to be thinking about where we get these things more. And I think especially the coronavirus pandemic, it taught us a lot of things. But one of the main things that it really, I think, reintroduced to the average person was this idea of supply chain. I mean, remember, Neil, it was about 4 years ago this month that we all realized there were no masks made in the United States. Just as the pandemic was starting, no masks were made here at all, which is sort of shocking, I think, to a lot of folks in the United States and North America. And so that's just one basic but crucial piece of medical equipment. Now just sort of extrapolate that across the entire electronics supply chain, and you really start to see that having opacity there, or not even having capability, can be extremely, extremely hurtful for your economy, especially as this energy transition accelerates. I mean, whoever controls lithium and copper and cobalt will control the 21st century economy the way that whoever controlled crude oil controlled the 20th century economy. And so these are the things that I really hope folks start to think through more, especially as they read the book. And I hope it sparks a conversation. It's a book for everyone.
And let's just repeat that for those in the back. Whoever controls lithium, copper, and cobalt in the 21st century will control the economy in the same way that people who controlled oil,
Yes.
you said, right?
Yes.
Control the economy in the 20th century. which
Yep.
is just, I mean, just take a moment, think about OPEC and Saudi Arabia, just to take, one country, um, and, take a similar type of, coalition of lithium, cobalt, copper mining countries. And, they can, I mean, go back to the 70s when we had a recession in 73 or so, right? With the gas prices going up and
Yep.
the impact of wars in the Middle East on oil prices, et cetera. That is a fascinating uh, parallel to
Yeah.
think about.
Yep. I
A
mean,
little
one of the things
scary, but
oh, go ahead.
fascinating. I was
Yeah.
going to say a little scary to think about, but
Yes.
fascinating.
I mean, it is scary when you think about what happened in the 20th century. We had armed conflict over crude oil. We had climate change because of crude oil based economy, and we had this big cartel, OPEC, form because of the demand to corner the market. And I talk about this in the book, but several analysts and other experts have warned and were telling me for the book that we could have armed conflict over copper in the 21st century, which sounds kind of crazy to think about. But it is a concern because as we go increasingly electric, we're going to need more copper, especially. I mean, copper doesn't just go into motors; it goes into wiring, it goes into many
Yeah.
other devices, it goes into pipes in your house, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can just start to see it's extremely important, and it's intrinsically linked to the global economy. I mean, economists nickname copper a Dr. Copper because it's linked to the economic health, really, of our world. And that's just one metal here. Now you need so many more. Rather than just crude oil, I think the average person is used to crude oil maybe going to a refinery and then out you get gasoline or diesel or jet fuel, etc.
Mhm.
But with critical minerals, you've got many more types of minerals, and they all have to be processed in unique certain ways depending on
Sure.
their end use. And so the complexity there grows as well for the supply chain. And these are things I sort of explore in detail in the book, but from a human lens, because these issues at the end of the day affect people. And so you get to meet folks on all sides of these issues and really see it through their eyes and help you as the reader determine what matters more to you.
Well, I'd say we convinced at least one person to go out and buy the book. Kavri says we'll
Excellent.
definitely be reading your book, Ernest, which is great. I want to bring in a few other folks who are watching. Our
Sure.
friend Ron Thomas is watching from Dubai.
Hey, Ron.
Ron, thank you. Ron's a former guest and hosts his own show on Fridays. He's a long-time expert around HR issues and
Oh,
personnel.
nice.
So he is a international speaker. And Ron, thank you all as always. Ron will check the time zone for work because he travels a lot. He'll always check to see where he's going to be Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern time, so he can log in and watch the show.
That's
Um,
commitment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Want to say hi to Mary Curtis, another former guest. She's a journalist in North Carolina. Has her own podcast at a column with Roll Call. And Mary, thank you as always for joining. Um, Naomi said earlier, I mentioned the show that I launched last week. Very enlightening and powerful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Naomi. I appreciate that. And Deborah Bernick is saying hi. She's here in the DC area, not far from where I live in Springfield, Virginia. And I will be seeing Deborah this afternoon delivering Girl Scout
Ooh.
cookies. My daughter is a Girl Scout, and Ernest, if you want cookies, we can hook you up. We still
I
have.
I might. We'll talk offline, but I
We'll,
might reach out to you and your daughter, Neil.
we'll we'll talk offline. We still have. You can still get cookies for through shipping until the beginning of March.
Okay.
Folks, if you're
We'll
interested,
talk.
let me know. We'll talk. We'll talk. Um, and Kaveri said particularly when we were talking about the idea of future wars and fights over mining, she said that was certainly an eye opener. So I want to thank you for that. Let's take a look at a few more pictures from the book, and then we'll shift to talking about Reuters
Sounds
and
good.
wire services. This one is about Rio Tinto, right?
Yes, yeah. So the last picture we looked at was of Dr. Windsor Knowsley, who is opposing this project known as Resolution Copper in Arizona. That's him. It's hard to tell, but if you go back to the Dr. Nosy photo, Neil,
Sure.
sort of just over his right shoulder, kind of far in the distance, is this what's called A-frame, this next photo. And this is basically, as the name implies, an A-frame, and as you can see, it's designed to hold the equipment that go down into a shaft. And so while Rio Tinto, and I go into this in the history in the book, I'll just kind of a quick highlight here. They don't actually own the land yet. That's a very complicated process that started with Senator John McCain about a decade ago. President Trump approved it. President Biden unapproved it when he came into office. And so right now the company basically just controls essentially a small sliver of land. And so they have used that land to dig what is the deepest mine shaft in North America. And that is that A-frame is over that mine shaft. And so as part of the book, I actually go down into the mine shaft and explain and explore with the reader the technical challenges that the companies had to work through in order to do that. And they basically have this mine shaft that they keep operating until they get permission to basically go out into the underground deposit. They hope soon, but we'll see. And to be able to then extract the copper from that deposit. But for now, this A-frame was really, and this mine shaft was built really as a test to see if they even could do it. I mean, just think about digging the deepest hole in North America. Like, that's pretty complicated. And so the company was able to overcome some technical challenges, including the farther down they drilled, they realized they were drilling into an underground lake. And so I get to the bottom of this mine shaft. It's more than a mile deep. And it's just covered in water, 100% humidity, water everywhere, water in the ceilings, water on my glasses, water everywhere. And so you really get to sort of see that as part of that chapter there. And it explores sort of just the technical challenges really to modern mining. You know, certainly there are cultural and ESG issues that need to be respectfully debated. There are also just technical challenges that need to be overcome. And so that's part of modern mining as well. I mean, it's not an easy profession. And I think you get a picture of that in the book.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yep.
We have the Chilean mining company, right?
Yes. Yep. So this is in northern Minnesota, in Ely, Minnesota. Not Eli. You only make that mistake once, and I did when I first came into town. But this company known as Antofagasta has a subsidiary called Twin Metals, and this is its office in Ely, Minnesota, which is just south of the Canadian border, so roughly 3 or 4 hours north of Minneapolis. And Twin Metals would like to also dig an underground mine that would do not only copper, but you can see the other metal names for the periodic table there. So you've got gold, you've got copper, you've got nickel, cobalt, and a few other platinums there. The problem, though, is that this underground mine is in a type of rock known as sulfide ore. And when exposed to water, it can, in some cases, form acid. And Neil, what's in northern Minnesota? What does it border? The Great Lakes. And so there's huge concern that if this rock were to be exposed to acid as it's taken out, that it could pollute the Great Lakes. Now, I should say that the company is very, very vocal about its ability to not have that happen. But what you do have, and I chronicle in the book, is the tension that some locals in Minnesota and elsewhere say that because the potential is there, how would you even institute a cleanup? Because when you think about the Great Lakes, they sort of are the beating heart of the waterway infrastructure for the entire continent. And so many folks are saying this is not the place to have this mine, even though the metals would be extremely important for the energy transition. And I chronicle folks for and against this proposed project, as well as the, I would say, confusing bureaucracy here, because I think one character that can't be overlooked is Washington, D.C. itself. I mean, this mine has been going back and forth in terms of different stages of development for decades and decades and decades, going back even before the Reagan administration. And the company itself is confused, I think is the right word, as to where the project stands. And opponents are happy right now because Biden has frozen it, but we could just as well have the project greenlit next year if we have a different administration in the White House. And so there's this confusing mix of what are the standards and what are not the standards. And I use the Twin Metals project to help the reader sort of try to make sense of this confusing hodgepodge of messages, really, from Washington, D.C.
So this is a mine in California, right?
Yes, not a normal spot where you think of it mining, I think. Not at
when I
all.
first saw the picture, so I've actually been up to the oil sands in Alberta.
Yeah.
And I was looking for the large, vehicles, the large dumpsters, the oversized dumpsters. I figured they'd be somewhere in there, but this looks very similar to the large oil sands operations that I've
Yeah.
seen.
So the mine is just so big to give a sense of scale for the audience here. Sort of on the left side, sort of on the middle, you can sort of faintly make out a truck there in the distance, sort of on
Yeah.
one of the ramps there. That actually is one of the trucks you're talking about. It's massive. It's as big as a house.
Wow.
And so this is the Mountain Pass mine in California. It's near the Las Vegas border, and it is the largest U.S. source of rare earths. And now, rare earths are a group of 17 minor metals on the periodic table, and they each have different uses. Their name is not really ideal because they're not really rare. What's rare is to find them in large quantities, like this Mountain Pass deposit here in California. And they end up being sort of like an add-on to a piece of equipment, sort of like the pepper to a steak. And they can be used in things like your cell phone. The reason your cell phone vibrates is because of a rare earth magnet that's made with rare earths, and there are no substitutes out there. So without rare earths, your cell phone wouldn't vibrate. And they're also used in electric vehicles. The thing that turns power into motion in an electric vehicle is a rare earth magnet. And again, no substitutes there. They're also, from just a strategic perspective, used in things like fighter jets that the Pentagon and other militaries around the world build and develop. Things like laser-guided missiles, things like night vision goggles. And so these are a very strategic area. And so the mine here, the Mountain Pass mine, I chronicle the attempts to basically win control in the bankruptcy court in Delaware after the previous owner went bankrupt. It's an extremely important economic area, and China has spent the past, I would say, 40 or 50 years really cornering the global market. And so now you have China having control of about, I'd say, 85, 89% of the global rare earths industry. And that sent the previous owner of this mine into bankruptcy. And so the chapter explores efforts by a hedge fund based in Chicago, as well as a Chinese minority partner, to basically buy this mine out of bankruptcy and resuscitate it. And then also resume processing, because after you take the rock out of the ground, you got to do something with it. You got to process it into a usable form. And that can be really, really complex as well. So it was important for me to sort of show the reader here this major project in the United States that is actively operating right now, but also how it's closely linked to geopolitical tensions around sourcing for these minerals.
So for perspective, I want to just point out, so there, Ernest mentioned there's a truck down kind of just off center to the left in the middle of the screen. This is that same type of truck. And that's
Yes.
the perspective of a regular human being with that truck. Just to give you a sense of how large, how massive those trucks are. And so there's that's truck, and then that's how small that truck is there at the bottom. So we're going to cover one or two more pictures and then switch gears and talk about Reuters as a news service. So this is a picture from Nevada,
Yes.
Thacker Pass.
Yes. Yeah. It's not a book about cows. I do want to say that at the outset here. This is the proposed Thacker Pass lithium mine site in northern Nevada on the Oregon border. And this is one of the largest deposits of lithium in North America. And a company known as Lithium Americas has been trying for more than a decade to build it. President Trump gave final approval a few days before he left office in 2021. And it was strongly opposed in court and elsewhere by a group of Native Americans, as well as a group of folks that consider themselves de-industrialists. That is, get rid of electricity, get rid of cell phones, get rid of modern agriculture in order to help fight climate change. And so I had been chronicling the tension in court and elsewhere around this project for many, many years. And as part of the book, I actually went to the site. I should say all the photos you're seeing were taken by me for the book. And so I went to the Thacker Pass mine site on the Nevada-Oregon border and visited the site with one of these de-industrialists. His name is Max Wilbert. And we walked about 4 or 5 miles across the site and really got to see the site through his eyes. He advocates a complete return to an agrarian way of life as the best way, in his estimation, to fight climate change. And while this might be considered a fringe perspective, In some quarters, it's increasingly getting attention. And Max's cause was featured on the front page of the New York Times. Bill McKibben in the New Yorker said he was fascinated by the fight against this project there. So it was really important for me to include that perspective here in the broader narrative. And I went up there, and as I mentioned, hiked around the site. I ended up camping out in the bed of my rental truck there at the site with him, and really got to see it through his eyes. And so you get to experience that in the book here and sort of understand as best we can what makes him tick.
And related to that, this is a billboard that was put up.
Yes.
Life over lithium, in case people can't read the detail.
Yep. This was put up by the people of the Red Mountain, which is an indigenous tribe in northern Nevada. And they call what we call Thacker Pass Pihimohu. And it's an area where more than 150 years ago, there was a massacre of indigenous peoples there. And so they consider Thacker Pass essentially a grave. And they would consider any building of this mine a desecration of that site. So that has been a main push by them. I will say that they did join forces with Max Wilbert and Max Wilbert's group. There's an interesting reason why they end up splitting. And I'll sort of leave that as a tease for the audience here to discover in the reading of the book. But I'll just say, Neil, that the reason that they have their relationship sundered, I did not have in my bingo card. And it was sort of an unlikely addition to this global battle over critical minerals.
Interesting. This has been a fascinating conversation with Ernest about the war below. And again, the book is out. The War Below, Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. Any debate on whether or not to include cobalt in that subhead, or
well, I'll tell you. So the book, we do look at lithium and copper, but we also look at cobalt and nickel and rare earths, as well as a few other minor metals. For us, I mean, lithium and copper. There were two reasons we included it in the subhead. One, because we feel that most people, if they've heard of any critical minerals, they've heard of lithium and copper. Certainly, lithium-ion battery is increasingly in the common parlance. And then two, we focus a lot on those, and it was a way to sort of get some in the headline. But as you would imagine, there was a lot of discussion about the subhead, and so, but we went with that because we felt that it was the best way to draw readers in, not only to the topic, but we felt that it might be the most recognizable on, say, a bookstore shelf or flipping through a online store.
Well, lithium-ion batteries certainly gets people's attention. So we're going to shift gears now and focus our attention on Reuters as a news organization. We'll take a look at the Reuters.com website, and we'll talk to Ernest a little bit about the evolution of wire services over the last several years. So let's bring up the Reuters.com, pull up the homepage here, and talk us through a little bit about what we're seeing, what stands out for folks.
First off, well, I guess the ad is gone. I was going to make a Super Bowl joke. We had a Super Bowl ad earlier.
Pull the ad back up. I was trying to hide it.
No, it's gone now. But so as I mentioned at the top, so I've been at Reuters about 15 years, and one of the things that immediately became clear to me is just sort of the breadth and the depth of the areas that we cover. I think a lot of times people think of Reuters as sort of just spending 30 years of your career looking at SEC filings. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that is most definitely not the case. And that Reuters aggressively fights and often wins to cover in many different areas. And you just get sort of a nice flavor of that here by looking at the front page. I mean, certainly what's going on in Washington is of key attention. So that's why you see a focus on the Republican Senate leadership debate going on right now. We also have on the left side there, we've got different world news. I mean, we've got more than 2,500 journalists across the world. We're the world's largest multimedia news organization. So we have people, as you can see there, in the Philippines and Spain and Finland and Indonesia and Myanmar, just to name the first sort of five there on this side.
I'll just read through the headlines for folks
Yes. Yeah.
who might be listening. So, in terms of the main, looks like it would be the display photo story or the lead. Trump's Republican Senate backers sour on longtime leader McConnell. There's a podcast that's featured, top of the fold, if you will, Eagle Pass: What It's Like to Live in an Infamous Border Town, and a world news story. Again, these are the ones with images that'll get people's attention. Pakistan's Khan-backed independence, Imran Khan's party, lead in final poll count. Um, and if you keep scrolling down, there's an article about Palestinian refugees in the West Bank fear UNRWA closure, the relief agency.
Yep.
Russian forces using Musk's Starlink in occupied areas, Ukraine says. And in bid to curb immigration, France to scrap birthright citizenship in Mayotte. I'm not sure where that is. European officials criticized Trump's NATO comments, but along the left, as you were mentioning earlier, Philippine landslide death toll climbs to 54. 14 injured after tree falls onto roller coaster in Spain. Finland's Stubb seen as frontrunner is in presidential runoff. Indonesia scraps plan to buy Mirage fighter jets from Qatar. Myanmar junta enforces mandatory military service for young people. Taiwan reports more Chinese balloons over Taiwan Strait. So with that kind of review, let's take a step back, Ernest. Can you give us a little bit about the origin of the Reuters news service?
Yeah, so Reuters was founded about 150-ish years ago in England by a man named Julius Reuter, and he started this news organization to, obviously deliver news. And the company's initial, or what I would say one of its first big claims to fame in terms of big breaks, we're in the business of breaking news, of course, was announcing to European stock markets that Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. As you would imagine, that had a strong effect on stock markets there. And the organization has grown significantly over time, and primarily headquarters in London, but then really, really going global. And so today, London, New York, Washington, Singapore are some of our biggest offices, as well as offices across the world. And I'm based in Houston. We've got huge offices across the United States, and as well as Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Northern Africa, Asia, Australia, etc. And we do have a strong presence in business news, as is well known, but we also have a huge international presence and folks across the world. And what really is the hallmark of Reuters journalism is our impartial approach to news. We strive for what's called freedom from bias, and they're part of our trust principles, which Reuters created during World War II to really cement what Reuters leadership at the time saw was our independence, free from being controlled by any one person or party. And so you can sort of think of them, there's not 10, but you can think of them sort of as the Reuters 10 commandments. And striving from freedom from bias is one of our trust principles. Sparing no expense to report the news is another one of them. And another is that Reuters won't be controlled by any one person or party at any one time. All of those trust principles are extremely important for me as someone who's on the front line. And we're constantly realizing and expecting of ourselves that we'll be sort of neutral third-party observers and try to bring as best we can a dispassionate approach to folks to help them understand the world in whatever format that might be. And that could be in text, it could be in video, it could be in still photography, it could be in graphics, or it could be in podcasting, audio, or another area. Neil, on the homepage, you pointed out the podcast that we have. That's a huge area for us as well. And as you got here, you've got the trust principles.
I pulled up the trust principles.
Yes.
So I thought I'd show them. You started reading them off, but I thought it'd be worth actually going over them.
Sure.
Because what's interesting is that these are at the bottom of every article, as a reminder for folks. So I wanted to just pull that up. Reuters shall at no time pass into the hands of any one interest group or faction. That the integrity, independence, and freedom from bias of Thomson Reuters shall at all times be fully preserved. That Reuters shall supply unbiased and reliable news services to newspapers, news agencies, broadcasters, and other media subscribers, and to businesses, government institutions, individuals, and others with whom Reuters has or may have contracts, that Thomson Reuters shall pay due regard to the many interests which it serves in addition to those of the media, and that no effort shall be spared to expand, develop, and adapt the news and other services and products of Thomson Reuters so as to maintain its leading position in the international news and information business.
Yeah.
And then there's a little more background, et cetera, and about the independence as well. But I thought that was really interesting to see that that it was added to every page, every article that you put
Yes.
out.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's really so that every single reader knows, and Reuters has more than 1 billion news consumers every single day. They know what Reuters stands for. Our one main asset is the trust that our audiences put in us, and we want to obviously defend that and protect that. I would. There's 5 there, as you pointed out. If you go down to number 4 or 5, Neil, again.
Sure. Give me one second to catch up to it. There we go.
Yeah, number 5. This can, in an age where sometimes newsrooms can be really squeezed for every penny for profit for third parties. I'm particularly proud as an employee to have this here. And it can often lead to sort of interesting areas. For instance, right now, the huge debate on how do we use AI in the newsroom, and different newsrooms have taken different approaches to this. But we're actually investigating how can we use AI to be more efficient, to be more of a service to the newsroom, and actually help our journalism. And so, I know our leadership has been open about these areas. So I'm not really breaking news here, but and we have no decisions sort of made yet as to how we're going to effectively use it broadly. But this would be an area that would be in line with number 5 here, that we're going to see how can we really dig into this new technological sphere and say, how can it make our news and our newsroom better, the way that past technological advancements have. Just remember, think of clips, Neil. Years ago, to find old clips, you'd have to go to a library, and you have to go through library cards, and you'd have to maybe you'd find that old story. Now you can pull up an old story in 2 seconds,
Sure.
just with the click of a button. So that's one technological advancement there that we sort of take for granted now. So what could AI lead to in the future that would sort of almost become second nature? I don't think we've begun to scratch the potential with it, but it's an area that we're poking into.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the evolution of wire services. There was a time when, I would say that the landscape was dominated by AP, Reuters, and UPI when UPI was back in its heyday.
Yeah.
And then, maybe, if I had more of the history, I'd probably guess that at some point UPI kind of fell in terms of its prominence, and it was AP and Reuters. But then over the last several years, the field of wire services is just it's proliferated, right?
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of attention, especially I would say in niche news areas. In terms of the big global ones, you've got Reuters, you've got AP, you've got Bloomberg, and a few others that have definitely really made cemented, I would say, their global footprint. And we each have sort of our own approaches to different areas and sort of niche focuses of our own. What I would say, and maybe might stretch folks a little bit to think about is I think everyone's a wire service now. I would say any traditional media organization is a wire service. We're all judged on obviously breaking up to the second news. We all have push alerts. We all have apps. We all are digital first. We all push directly to go to consumer as well as to sell our news to professional audiences. And that can look like different things to different people. But selling the cooking app is a great way to get not only for the New York Times to get to a cooking audience that's a consumer, but also a professional audience. That's just one example. Reuters has talked a lot about how do we get out to business professionals and really help them make sense of the world and the complexity of the world. That's a huge area of focus for us, as well as the consumer. I mentioned our podcast earlier, which is a huge push into our consumer growth potential there, and really tapping the power of the Reuters global brand to bring to readers a 10-ish minute show every day that helps them understand the best and the top headlines that they need to know. And then on weekends, we do sort of deeper dives. So I would say that in an area where we are increasingly strapped for time, all of us, you, me, everyone, Neil, there's a huge fight to get news out to those people as best and as fast as possible from a wide range of audiences, including from what might be considered traditionally wire services. But we're all competing for them now. I mean, we know, Neil, that more people consume news now than at any time in history. Just the percentage of news consumption is extremely high. But what has happened, though, is a splintering of news sources where people actually get their news. Whether that's social media or whether that's from traditional sites or whether that's from other sources out there. And so I think the challenge for news organizations across the board is to really, how do we fight for that attention and fight for that and that consumer and that business relationship. And I think that has created a blending, if you will. I don't think there's a distinction as much as anymore as it used to be between what we would consider traditional wire services and then also just traditional news organizations. I think they blended together.
And I think it'd be interesting, just to point out in terms of the staffing for a wire service. I think typically most people think of breaking news and the running updates, getting a first story out, because you're feeding news organizations who can't cover it themselves. But in addition to breaking news, I mean, the kind of work that you're doing is not not meant for 20-minute updates, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
longer form, longer, almost like a tradition, not, I want to say traditional, but our frame of reference is the New York Times. So it's almost, I would say, maybe one thing you could think about is, if the New York Times started off as mostly the daily reporting, long form, investigative journalism, etc., and they've moved into now the 24-hour news cycle. Reuters, other wire sources started off in the 24-hour news cycle in terms of churning out the updates, and maybe have moved into the longer form reporting. Is that a fair um, assessment to make?
I would say
Or
perhaps
no?
yes, with maybe some caveats on other sides, but yes, I
Please.
mean, I as a beat reporter, I do need to do the breaking news up. That's really up to the second, and if something happens, have those sort of what we call rolling trunks, where you're updating every 20 or 30 minutes. But then also sort of longer form pieces that really take a stand back and help readers see the forest for the trees. And that's perhaps is no different than a beat reporter elsewhere at other, maybe what are considered traditional news organizations. But in general, yeah, I mean, I think I would agree broadly with the assessment, that there's sort of a blending together of those
over
two
the long
approaches.
over the long arc of journalism.
Yes, yeah,
Certainly now everyone is having to cover news and breaking news.
yes,
But kind of
yeah.
more just in terms of the focus of the organization 50 years ago, for example. It, again, making broad statements.
Yes, yeah, no, for sure there. Um, yeah, it's a great comment, Kaveri.
Discovery.
At the end of the day, we don't have the only asset that we have is the trust that readers put into us. So, it's important for us to help people make sense of the world by explaining what's going on and saying this is why this matters. My experience as a journalist, though, in the past 17, 18 years has been that you rarely need, there's no need ever to embellish anything, because sometimes the world is crazy enough. And so, I mean, just by laying stuff out there helps people see the world, including the good and the bad and the ugly.
Sure. And I want to make sure that to read Covery's comment. I like wire services for their pure news focus rather than opinion, because that is something that a lot of folks have challenges with in terms of understanding when an article is in the paper or online. Is it news or is it opinion? Are the journalists inserting their opinion into what should be news items? The other journalism outfits like the New York Times does their best to draw a very strong distinction between news and editorial. Reuters doesn't have a editorial and opinion side, or does it?
We do. It's called Breaking Views, and
I
it
mean,
does.
opinion, like in terms of their own, like editorial board, their own opinion. section or no?
Reuters does not. No, Reuters does not have an editorial board, but breaking views is financial commentary and opinion related to
Oh, okay.
primarily financial related topics. And so, hypothetical, if a large conglomerate decides to spin off one of its divisions, they might have a piece that might look at that and unpack that for readers and help share certainly their opinion and their analysis on this. But that would come from a commentary perspective. We do have columnists that look after the financial services industries as well as the commodities industries. So there is a gentleman named Andy Holm, for instance, who does great work providing commentary and his opinion on metals markets. And that would be his opportunity to really pour himself into the story. It's first person often, and which obviously would differ from what I do.
Got it. Thank you for that clarification. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Our guest, of course, has been Ernest Scheyder, senior correspondent for Reuters. And we started the conversation talking about his book, The War Below, Lithium, Copper, and the Global Battle to Power Our Lives. And as you can see from the blurb here about the book, it's really about the tension in order to build electric vehicles, solar panels, and power cell phones. And millions of other devices, we need to do more mining to extract lithium, copper, and heavy metals. And there's a question of where these mines are located in terms of on indigenous lands. It'll impact biodiversity, etc. Some really great issues that were raised in this book. Ernest, we're going to make a couple of quick announcements, and then I'll bring you back for a final word.
Sounds great.
Again, our guest has been Ernest Scheyder. A couple of programming notes. Next week is President's Day, so we will be taking the week off, and we will not have a show next weekend. But I do want to let folks know that we will have a very interesting show the week after. And I want to just bring up the website for that show. Sorry for the delay. I'll bring that up in just a moment. Kelsey Russell is going to be our guest. Now, what's really interesting about Kelsey is she is sharing, doing similar work to what we're doing in terms of sharing the paper, but she is talking about, she's doing it on TikTok and other platforms for Gen Z. Extra, read all about it was the Slate article. A 23-year-old is single-handedly getting Gen Z hooked on newspapers and print media. And you see a screenshot of some of her viral videos. So she will be our guest on February 22nd. So please make sure to join us for that. As I mentioned earlier, the show is produced by Digimentors. It's the consulting firm that Sree set up with his friend Andrew Lee several years ago. And we also want to give a shout out to Muckrack, who is a longtime sponsor of the New York Times Read Along. As you know, every week we do the show 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. We usually focus on the New York Times. This week was a special Reuters read along. So we want to thank Muckrack for their support. And I also wanted to remind you folks of this show that's also produced by Digimentors, and I'm thankful for their support. Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. And our next episode will be February 22nd. We are going 2 times a month, and our guest will be Candace Sanchez. So please join us February 22nd for that show. With that, I'm going to bring back our guest, Ernest Scheyder, for a few final thoughts. If you were to sum up the book and the issues that were raised there, what's the main theme? What's your final pitch?
Sure. Yeah. So Neil, I've learned one thing writing this book here is you get to ask one question of your audience. That's after all the blood, sweat, and tears put into this book. That's what I've learned. And I would say the one theme that I'm putting to this audience is a question of choice. I mean, what are the choices we're willing to make if we want a green energy transition? What are the choices we're willing to make if we want all of these electronic gadgets and gizmos that underpin our everyday lives? They're all built with critical minerals and metals, and those have to be sourced from somewhere. And right now, the supply chain is so opaque and very confusing to figure out where it comes from. And the United States and many Western nations do not produce many of these metals and minerals. And so, what I'm bringing to the reader here is this idea of choice. What are the choices we're willing to make to have this transition? Are we willing to have some places near us mined in order to produce these, in order to build a sense of broader economic and energy independence? And ultimately, this is a story also about community, because there are people that are affected by our actions and inactions around these choices. And you really get to see, when you read The War Below, the people on all sides of this issue and see it through their eyes. And so I'm hoping the reader, for her himself, will be able to grapple with these tough choices, learn about the complexities of our everyday supply chains, and help spark a conversation about these tough issues. I mean, this is a book for everyone because it's about a topic that affects everyone.
That's great. Thank you, Ernest, for that. I really appreciate that summary. Folks, encourage you to go out and buy the book, The War Below. As Kaveri said earlier, it really was opened up her mind and gave us a new perspective on some of these issues. So thank you again for joining us. And right on cue, Kaveri said, enjoyed this discussion, learned so much.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And as a reminder, we won't see you next weekend, but we'll see you the weekend after. Have a great Sunday, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Neil.